Hello, everybody. That's a special day today, the 1st of July. And I'm very pleased to have with me James Topp. James, maybe you don't know him, but my goal today is for you to know James pretty well. Thank you, and just watch that interview. James, welcome to the Max Bernier Show.
Thank you, sir.
I'm very pleased that you are here today. And for our viewers, they may not know you, and I want you to tell us a little bit about your life. I know that you work with the military, but just before that, you have a family, you have a wife. Yeah. I know it's maybe some private life. You'll tell us what you want to tell us.
Sure. I actually was born in Ontario in North York, and but my family moved to British Columbia when I was a kid and around the Lower Mainland. So I grew up in Surrey, Delta, the suburbs of Vancouver. I grew up in Victoria. We spent some time in Alert Bay and Kitimat. So really, in a couple of different places in BC. So I kind of consider British Columbia my home, and that's where I live now. I don't have a family there.
And so you worked in BC for the Canadian Forces.
Well, not really. I mean, when I first joined up, there used to be a facility there where I worked, Work Point Barracks in Princess Patricia Canadian Light Infantry. And that would have been in the early 90s. I went overseas. So just to back it up a little bit, I joined the Army in the early 90s. And then that was one of my first postings after completing all of basic and infantry training. So I'm an infantryman by trade. And, that was my regiment, my parent regiment. Went overseas in 92 and 93. Spent a year in Croatia. When I came back from that, I got out of the Army for a little while, and I got right back in because, I think at that particular point in time, it was something I had become used to, and I didn't really see myself in another kind of job, even though I had thought about getting into the police forces. In the mid-90s, I rejoined the Army, and then I went to Petawawa in Ontario, and I spent 14 years there. And then I remained there, and I got posted to Trenton and then Kingston, and then I went back to the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. So for those who are not informed, those are two of the three main infantry regiments, regular Army regiments in Canada. And then we have Vandus in Quebec, right? So I spent time in these two different units and a brief period of time in the Airborne Holding Unit while the disbandment was going on. Mm-hmm. So I have this kind of range of experience within the infantry regiments, and I wanted to go back to the original regiment when I joined, and that's what I did in 2015. Mm-hmm. And in 2019, I transferred from the regular Army to the reserves. That was useful for me because I was able to I decided at that particular point I needed to do something else with, as a full-time job, and that's what I did. I transferred to the reserves, and that allowed me to pursue a kind of new career in the public service.
Can you tell us when the event happened, and I must say maybe the different opinion from the Canadian Forces and you because of your participation of a rally, something like that? Is that?
No. What happened was that in March of 2020, we had all of the circumstances put in place with regard to pandemic measures. Yeah. Early on, I had always been skeptical of what has been reported in the media, so I had formed a different kind of opinion, and I think based on established fact at that particular point in what was happening in the world. And, so I really wasn't overtaken with the fear and alarm that a lot of people were, I think, with what we were being reported, with what was being reported. And, so this went on for a year and a half. Like for myself, I had, I was perfectly happy. I had a part-time job with the armed forces, still having a foot in that world, which suited me perfectly fine. And then I had a new full-time job, which was excellent, I worked as a facility manager with the RCMP. I worked with a great bunch of officers and another civilian. And it was really something, it was a 7 to 3 or a 3 to 11 kind of shift work, which is, it suited me perfectly for that particular point in time in my life. And then we had the introduction of mandatory vaccinations or disclosure of the vaccination status for members of the federal government. And so I was affected because I was still employed in 2 different federal government departments, right? The Department of National Defense.
And your RCMP.
No, the public service.
Public service. Okay.
Right. So that's the way it works as a civilian. When you're working with an organization like the RCMP, you are employed by the public service.
Okay.
However, the employer is the RCMP.
Okay.
And regardless, all of these federal government departments were affected the same way.
Yeah.
And my issue with it was not so much the vaccines, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and it probably this is what is needed to be done to kind of get past the traditional media, painting everything with the same brush.
Yeah.
But my issue is not so much with the vaccine itself. I think it should be something that is offered for those that feel they need it. There was two real issues I had with it. It was this kind of government overreach or intrusion into our personal lives by the implementation of these policies. And it was this requirement to disclose something such as your vaccination status, which I felt that my employer in that situation had no need of knowing. Okay, like I don't go to and tell them, I have a rubella vaccine. They don't need to know that, right? So ultimately, and what I saw too was this, if we didn't start saying something and doing something, if these policies continued, then what was next? If was what's the next thing? Like they're all, we were at a point where you needed 2 vaccines to be quote unquote fully vaccinated, and then it's 3, and then it's 4, and when does it stop?
Yeah.
And then what's the next policy, right? And that was kind of where I drew my line. I had gone along with everything like most people, just kind of grinning and bearing it and waiting for it to be over. Yeah. And I have to say that this was, like I said last night at the War Memorial. This is I learned from folks like yourself. I learned from Kristen Nagel and Paul Alexander and everybody else who kind of was saying, okay, there's something not right here with all of this. And, they came out and did what they did and said what they said long before I did. So, I'm just, like I said, I learned it. I learned, that, okay, this was something that needs to be, we need to do something together and to stop this, because it's, like I said, I'm not liking the direction this is going. And I'm saying this as a federal government employee.
So you're not anti-vax, you are for the freedom of choice, and you wanted just to be able to decide if you will have these 2 shots or not. And
Exactly.
That's the same thing for me. I'm not a doctor, and I'm just saying, everybody must be free to decide if they want the shot. Good for them. And but so at that point, you decided, okay, I don't want these 2 shots. But what happened? So because a lot of people like you lost their jobs, and for a personal medical decision. So you said you were not at ease with that direction and imposing a vaccine passport. So what happened after that?
I had all this occurred. So I was placed on leave without pay, which was devastating to me because, like I said, I had an excellent job. I loved working there, and I wasn't allowed to go in and do my job anymore. And then the Department of National Defense informed me I would also be released from the armed forces now on this administrative release and what is called the 5F. And so, to make it language that everybody can kind of maybe understand, it's like a dishonorable discharge. But I'm being released administratively now because I'm exhibiting behavior, or it's the exact verbology escapes me at this point, but it's unwillingness or inability to change a behavior. And so this behavior is my, refusal to comply with the Chief of Defense Staff Directive on vaccines. And that happened in November. What happened after that was, I do get a pension from my regular forced time, and that helps pay my mortgage. But I still needed employment, right? I needed to
work.
yeah, I needed to work. I ended up getting employment as a tow truck operator, and in that way, I started, having exposure to the Canadian public that I'd never really had before, right? And doing that job, I just you're out towing people's cars or helping them, with if they have a flat tire and all kinds of stuff like that, and it was just a different experience for me. And actually seeing, what's happening, like when truck drivers started to announce that they were going to protest against these mandates, and the way that became a kind of new, I don't know what you want to call it. There's this, I know it's called right now, it's being labeled as this quote unquote freedom movement. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that statement, because if there's a movement here, like how is it organized, who's in charge, I don't know if that's applicable here. However, it did give birth to something. I know a lot of
grassroots movement with the leadership was very different.
It's probably something that is naturally occurring in these circumstances, right? So regardless, it was something like I identified with it, like a lot of Canadians did, right? Because regardless of whether they were vaccinated or unvaccinated, I know that there was significant, it was a divisive issue, right? However, between November and January, I was in a very, dark place personally. And I reflected on that, and I came to realize I wasn't the only one in that position. And, doing this job and then seeing what truck drivers were doing and saying, and, I identified with that too, because I'm out on the roads now and come to I knew it all along anyway, but everything that you have in your store and that, gives you the quality of life that you have was delivered by a truck. And that truck was driven by a truck driver. So we owe them a lot. And they're not always recognized for what they do and the sacrifices that they make. And it can be dangerous. And I'm telling you, this is somebody who worked as a tow truck driver in the quote unquote highway through hell area in Hope, British Columbia. So, this is something that I took on board, because this is, in a similar way, I'm a soldier, and this is in a similar way, they're doing their job and taking goods back and forth across the country through treacherous areas and risking their life doing it.
What you're saying, they were essential workers in the beginning of the pandemic when we didn't have vaccine, and the vaccine were 100%. We didn't have any vaccine. We allowed them to travel and do their job.
Yeah, and what happened was we saw this thing happen in Ottawa. It was a protest, a mass movement. And that lifted me up. That inspired me. It really did. And to see Canadians from all different backgrounds and income levels and beliefs, they came together and they went to Ottawa to make their voices heard, and that made me proud. That and like a lot of folks did, and brought that pride back to the to the Canadian public. And the response that was building, I think, and the response that they received, that was insulting to me as well, because as they were ignored, vilified. Everything that happened was misreported, and no attempt by our federal government to kind of to reach out and hear what was being said. That's, and I'm not saying this because I was there, because I wasn't. I was in British Columbia at the time.
I can tell you I was there. And, the federal government decided not to have any discussion with people who were there. And they decided to discredit everybody there. That was their strategy.
So with regard to that response, that was just kind of the final straw for me. And I felt like, I didn't join the army with, I think I had ideals, but I joined the army as a young person wanting to, go and have adventures and travel and stuff, right? And then it was like in later years where I really thought, okay, so what am I doing wearing the uniform? Who am I responsible to? And really, I put the uniform on um, to be a part of this organization that it provides security for the country and for the people in it.
Yeah.
So, I identified with the Canadian public and everything that was happening there. So in February, when we had this response, I felt very strongly that that was the time I needed to say and do something. Um, and early on, I recognized that there was, that something was happening there. This was the birth of something, and it was like anything in its infancy, in its developmental stages. And early on, it was very loud and angry and red-faced, and um, and rightly so, and to some extent. But I recognized early on that was okay. We needed to kind of have how do I put it, like a response of our own that was coherent and intelligent, and not to say that hasn't happened, but I mean.
Yeah, but yeah, that protest for me was more a celebration, and people knew at that time that if we are all together, like I like to say in my speeches under the freedom umbrella, that will end. So that was a nice time also, but at the same time, that movement questions every Canadians about okay, what I want. As a Canadian, and what I want to see, where I want to see my country. So that was something that you think about. Okay, what is the future?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, it was the response to that and how it was dealt with. And again, I can't stress the importance of veterans that arrived there to stand with the Canadian public. That was also a big part of what motivated me to, because I was still serving at that point in time.
Serving part-time. You were part-time at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was, but I was employed as a reservist. I still am, right? Until such time as I'm, ejected. But I'm still so proud of the Canadian Army and what it has accomplished. But this particular issue is, I think I don't know. You get to a point where you have to draw a line about what's right and what's wrong, and I felt there was an ethical violation there. And I felt it was my duty to stand up and say something about it. And that's what I did. I put my uniform on. We did a practice run with my niece in the backyard of her house, where I kind of made this very public announcement about the issues that I thought were affecting me and a number of Canadians, and what I was going to do about it. So from there, I went to a rally in Surrey, British Columbia, and for the sole purpose of finding some media that I could stand in front of and say the same thing.
With your uniform?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so anybody who's watching, when you read the headlines, there is this kind of the way it's being messaged is that I'm being charged, and that is the case, but not criminally, right? I'm being charged under the National Defense Act for in the violation of the Code of Service Discipline with regards to social media policy. That is true. It is ongoing. More than likely, it will go to court-martial at some point in time. But as it stands right now, nothing has. It is still a process that's ongoing. So there has been no sentence passed down or anything like that. And I have a lawyer working with me, and we're going to manage that as it develops. But that the reason why I'm being charged is not because it was being misreported because I, quote, supporting the Freedom Convoy. I'm being charged because I went on public in uniform and made statements critical to the government. That's why I'm being charged. I'm here for them. I put this uniform on for them to defend this country. So I want everybody to know what I intend to do as a form of protest against overbearing government mandates is to march from Vancouver to Ottawa on foot, under my own power and on my own dime. This is peaceful. This is constructive. This is setting an example. So that is something that I anticipated would happen, which is perfectly fine. But what I wanted to get out there was, I'm a human being. Just because I wear a uniform, it doesn't mean that I have to unquestioningly obey an order that I think is wrong.
Yeah.
And I announced that point that that was February the 12th. It was interesting because that was my dad's birthday. It was a Saturday, and I had discussed my plan to conduct this protest march with a couple of members of my family and one of my best friends.
So you knew that may have an impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and
What was their advice when you had the discussion with them?
Well, my best friend, who I consulted with right off the bat, he said, "Oh yeah, you should do that," because it was something I knew I could do. That's my background in the infantry. You do a lot of marching, and I had competed in they've since been relabeled as the Iron Warrior, but they used to be called Ironman competitions. So it's kind of a multi-stage and adventure race, if you will. Very challenging, and it was just something I knew I could. I was, how do I put this? Pretty confident in my ability to do. So I announced that while I went out and said, these vaccination policies are wrong. Nobody should be coerced into accepting this because they're being told that you're not going to get paid. Yeah. And that's what I did. I went out and made the announcement. I said I'm going to depart from Vancouver on February the 20th, and almost immediately after that, those two videos hit the internet. I started. People tried to get in contact with me with regards to their desire to participate and or support, right? And it was pretty overwhelming. I was expecting some people to kind of care, and I was expecting to maybe have to do it on my own from start to finish.
And you are ready for that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and but I really wasn't prepared for the response. Like the positive response was incredible, and that's like I said last night too. That was what got me here. That was why it was a successful journey, because it was a bit of a challenge for me at first too, to realize I had to accept this help, and I was kind of
Why? You must be welcoming that. And it was difficult for you to accept.
Yeah,
that.
kind of. I mean, I thought, okay, I can do it on my own, but I probably could have. However, I think it would have taken much longer and it would have been much more difficult. And it was just, there was a requirement, I think, to be visible, and this was the way I needed it done. It became apparent fairly early on, and even when I started to come into contact people. One family that I met in Abbotsford, like 3 days into it, and their son, he was actually, so some of the coincidences were quite meaningful. So I was inspired by Terry Fox as a young child, because he was doing the business when I was a kid, of this marathon of hope that he had. Not that I'm not comparing myself to Terry Fox. Like he's somebody, he's a higher order of human being. But, absolutely, this march and having a protest march was something that I felt was, I wanted to start somewhere that had personal significance to me, which is why I started at Terry Fox statue in Vancouver.
Okay.
And 3 days later, I meet this family, and they had a kid. Well, he's not a kid; he's a young man. He had similar cancer, and he actually marched with us. So he's an amputee. He had his leg amputated, and he had the same type of cancer that Terry Fox had. So I met this family and this young man, and he marched with us for a while. He actually did really well. He got over 20 kilometers, and he was it was an inspiration, I think, to us on the team too, because it was late February, and even though the weather conditions in the Lower Mainland are a little bit more favorable, in the winter. It was very windy that day, and he just kept at it. And it was really, really good to see.
When you're saying it was for you and the team, can you tell us a little bit more about the team? How did you build your team?
Well, like I said, I went not really knowing. I had met about four people online, and including there was a Canadian woman who had moved to Ireland quite some time ago, but she was instrumental in helping me, like, build a website, build the social media presence. I mean, I couldn't have, got the message out that I was doing what I was doing without her help. And then that was the kind of online support. And then I met, for the first time on February the 19th, the people who wanted to help me and support me on the march. And there was 3 or 4 of us at the time. And when I had announced, okay, I'm going to be leaving on this day, Sunday morning, there was probably, upwards of 60 or 70 people at the departure, right? Like I wanted to make it available.
Yeah.
And that's why I met Christian and some of the other members of the team, like Dan and Dallas, who've been with me since, we left. And I didn't know them before we met on February the 20th. And, Christian and I have, he has military experience from his days in the reserve. And that was, he was instrumental in helping me because, I'm sure you saw yesterday, it takes a bit of management, right, to have that many people marching, and getting through the city and getting through the intersections. And it was guys like him right at the start who was helping me do that as we marched out of Vancouver. And like I said, it was he was there to support me, and then it just grew from there. And then as we got out of Vancouver, in those early days, we had people reaching out saying, "Hey, come stay with us," and that way you don't have to camp out. And then so they opened their homes to us.
Did you? So the way that you were going to people's houses, and also did you camp also during the winter?
We didn't really have to camp until later on, but really that's what we had this kind of connection with social media. And with the website, we said, okay, well, if you want to support and you think you want to put the team up, that time we were a bit of a smaller group. They allowed us to, come into their house and, we would sleep in the basement and clean up after ourselves. And, they would, they were more than, like the general, this is one of the things that, really was quite amazing. And it's unfortunate that doesn't get reported on because this is why this was successful as well. It was like, you had people come stay with us, we'll give you dinner. And, they really believed in what we were doing and why. And
that's great.
It was incredible. So despite all the hardship and the stress and strain of it all, that was the part of it that was the most, really, it was something to see. And, it's kind of overwhelming in a way. I mean, but, and that's the way it went. Like, between, folks online connecting with us on the ground, and then arranging these different okay, well, we see you're going to be going 40 to 50 kilometers and we live in that area, so you can come and stay with us for the night. And then what we would do is march as far as we could, stop for the day. Folks would say, come stay with us, and we would go stay there and then go back to where we stopped and then resume marching.
So when you were marching, did you eat while you are marching?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So again, this is kind of one of those things where it was, the serendipity. I mean, we had a gentleman support us with his RV at the beginning, and he had personal reasons he couldn't go further than Hope. And we realized going through we were getting ready to go through the mountains, and we realized we're going to need some kind of mobile support unit, which is when we met with the brother of one of the people early on who offered his, actually the first night out, we stayed at this place called Olympian Gym. So he allowed us to sleep in his gym in the evening in Maple Ridge, Vancouver. And his brother happened to be getting ready to move, and they wanted to sell their RV. So he allowed me to kind of put a down payment on it. And then he was generous enough to allow us to use that. RV as our kind of mobile support, and that was what that's how we did it. So I'm kind of familiar with this type of movement, right? So it's like um, you have a place where you can take shelter, especially going through the mountains, where it was you're still kind of in winter conditions.
Yeah.
Send the RV forward, have it ready, and have somebody in there preparing some food, and then we would send it forward, march up to it, 3 to 5 or maybe even farther. Sorry, yeah, 3 to 5 kilometers, or sometimes even farther. But it takes, when you're marching, just to go 5 or 6 kilometers takes an hour.
Yeah.
And this is where my training in planning and doing this kind of thing. I knew that this is the way it's done. So you don't just march till you drop every day. You have to.
So you try to have a goal 5 to 6 kilometers an hour.
More or less. So that's not the speed. That's just the distance.
Yeah.
So we would stop at the RV, get something to replenish, or to eat, or to have something to drink, and then so we would take a 5 or 10 minute break every hour that way, and then at the end of the day, then we would move to wherever we were going to sleep that night.
And after that, you were coming back to the last place and start
Yeah.
there. And you had a backpack. So what did you have in that? And
Well, I needed to have that's the way we do things in the Army. It's contingency planning. You have
Okay.
what you need to survive in the wilderness for 24 hours.
okay,
And I wanted to make sure, because not knowing if, especially when we were going through the mountains, if the RV was going to be able to make it through some of the passes, or it might get caught up in some weather, I needed to make sure that everybody on the team had what they needed, like a sleeping bag, warm clothing, shelter, some kind of food and other supplies, should they need to survive without the vehicle whether or not we got to a campsite or had to go and sleep in the woods or something. So that was just one of those things where I don't know. It was a demonstration, I think, to this is a disciplined approach, right? Like,
Yeah.
this was not just something where it was unplanned, and we didn't have any kind of training, right? So I always had the what you needed on your back to live if it came to it, like without shelter, like without a house or an RV or something. And then it just became something that we just.
And what was the weight of your pack?
Well, it was early on. It was probably 40, 50 pounds, because going through the mountains, like, you need a sleeping bag, right? You need clothing, and you need all these, you need 24 hours of food and some water and something to cook with. So, we had more supplies early on, but then as the weather gets better, and this is typical of of the training and how we do operations, like if the conditions allow for it, you can kind of reduce the amount of things that you carry, provided that the environmental conditions allow for it, right? And that's how we were able to kind of lighten the load and pick up some speed as we got across the prairies and closer to Ontario. So now as we were picking up the pace, going across the prairies, getting in 45 or 50 kilometers a day in that fashion, like I described, the rucksacks were a little bit lighter, probably like 25, 30 pounds. But we still, you have in there, a change of clothing and socks and everything. So even though it probably, wasn't necessary at times, but it was just, how do I put it? Maintaining the procedure, right?
Did you take some days off or?
Yeah, well, we had to, absolutely. It was, um, every 5 or 6 days, we would just take an administration day. I would like to call it the rest day, but it wasn't really a rest day, because there was still a number of things that had to be done with regards to vehicle maintenance and interviews and arranging accommodations for the next leg of the trip, and all kinds of stuff like that. And that was how it kind of, it's really an amazing story, and the way, like, everybody kept it together. I mean, we're not getting paid, right? Like, we got donations, but that went to fuel,
Pay for the expenses.
food. And then later on, we had these kind of meet and greets where it was like, people would have a potluck, and there was a little bit of fundraising going on. And, then I was able to tell folks, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And the thing is, early on, I was asked, okay, so you're going to do this protest march, and then what, so what are you going to do when you get to Ottawa? And I had to have a conversation with myself and really ask, well, what am I going to do? Because I didn't really, that one thing I was kind of unsure of. And I realized I felt I had to appeal to our representatives in the House of Commons, right? So I wrote a letter and I declared this march, why I was doing it. So there was 3 main points. It was a protest against these policies. I was speaking for everyone in my position who had lost their employment or was placed on leave without pay. And I was speaking for those that, would not have went along with this, but they felt that their livelihoods were threatened.
Yeah.
And
a lot of Canadians, by the way.
and that in its of itself, I've met thousands of people now, and of those folks that had got put in that position, they're very angry that they had to do this. Like I know a lot of people didn't really think, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And they did what they did and they accepted the procedure, and it didn't really mean that much to them. But there's a lot of folks out there who felt that, this was something that they did against their will, because they didn't want to risk, they have bills, they have houses, they have families, and or they have positions. Like, you're not just going to, give up your career that you've worked so hard for because, it doesn't, for something like this. So,
and you may have a family and you're the only one that is working. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that letter went out and I requested a meeting with them. And then we chose the date of the 22nd of June because I felt, okay, that's the date that I will be in Ottawa. And then we had to amend the arrival date, but we still kept that original meeting date. And what happened after that was, this kind of, these meet and greets and stuff allowed me to explain everything about what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I asked folks to, write to their members of parliament, and if they thought that what I was doing was important enough to them, that they could write to their members of parliament.
To be sure that they would be there. Yeah.
And just to be clear, like, I did write this letter to every member of parliament, like 338 of them. And that was, that in and of itself too was an experience because, before I decided to write to all the members of parliament, I didn't actually know how many there were, right? But yeah, I think this is the point of it too, is to we have to educate ourselves into how the system works if we want to
influence,
to implement some change that we think is necessary. So I started off and I had announced that this is a nonviolent protest. This is not about me going there to bang the table, right? This is about opening a dialogue and a discussion. And if you agreed with that, then you reach out to your member of parliament, regardless of what party they belong to or who they are. Because like I said, this letter went out to every individual working in the House of Commons, from the top guy to the backbencher. And it just turned out that, as this got picked up more speed and we got closer and closer, and I think, people started to realize it wasn't just some kind of publicity stunt. This is actually happening. We had more response. And, this is kind of an eye-opening experience for me too, to see this, what is happening in this world, right? This political world. Like I think, it's like we have this idea of what happens in government, and we just think that every politician's all the same. Just like, everybody in this freedom movement is all the same or whatever. But what I really came to see was that when I had a chance to speak to them individually, they're human beings like we are. And I say they, but we are the same. We're people. We're Canadian citizens, and they happen to work for the federal government as well in a different capacity. But they're caught up in this kind of institution that is inflexible and capable of.
The party line usually.
Yeah, yeah, and I just so I recognize the hardships that they face in that kind of environment where it's like and I've experienced it too within the armed forces, right? Like there's bureaucracy and there's procedures, and when it's necessary, it can turn on a dime, but for the most part, it takes a lot of work to get your voice heard in that kind of environment. Yeah. So that was part and parcel of this whole venture, right? Like the march was a mechanism to kind of get that meeting, and to speak to the meeting on the 22nd of June. And it's being used as a wedge issue now, which is unfortunate. But I really think that, this is a demonstration, and I said this clearly in a couple of letters. This is what the Canadian people need to see, because I was seeing folks now who are affected by mandates, but I was also meeting people who felt disenfranchised and they have lost hope in the system. And I'm meeting people who want to leave the country and they think, we're becoming communists and all this kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily think that this, how do I put this? It's not entirely accurate. The system is definitely calcified, if you will. But if you try and you work hard enough at it, you can get this conversation happening. And I think to the 22nd of June, it demonstrated that if you work at it hard enough and enough people are speaking with the same voice, it works. And I wanted that to happen because, like I said, I needed I am not anti-government. Like I just, I think the government just needs to work as it should. And in a way, I wanted to have something that demonstrates to the Canadian people that it does work. But at this particular point, we need to do there's a need to be a lot of effort to make it work as it should, to make the gears turn
on the right direction.
Yeah. And so anyway, the members of parliament that did agree to speak to me, I think they showed a lot of courage in coming out there, because I know that there was this, in this media landscape that we're in right now, everybody trying to get their voice heard because they have this, opinion or feeling about this whole issue is painted as some kind of, radical extremist or something like that, which is not the case.
So what was your experience with the mainstream media at that point?
Well, at that point, I had been largely ignored. Well, completely ignored, really. There was one attempt by a reporter from CBC early on to have an interview, which I declined because at that particular point, I couldn't articulate really all of the reasons and rationale. And then after that, I never really heard anything. There was a short piece as we were moving through Regina, because we got caught up in a snowstorm there, and that was reported on. And then there was a media piece that came out about my charges, and that's been and so what I found with these different conversations I was having with folks is that it's this how do I put it? Media capture of certain minds that influence the opinions of personnel in the government, who then build policy based on what they're seeing in the media. So it's really this kind of bizarre relationship where members of parliament who were aware of what I was doing were afraid to come and speak to me because of how they would be illustrated in speaking with somebody like who had been, charged, right? Even though there was no sentence passed. Yeah. And I was also it was misreported that I was being charged for, supporting the Freedom Convoy, which is that's not what it was about. So in those two things, members in the House of Commons refraining from wanting to participate in the discussion, because that's what I wanted. a discussion and a conversation about the way forward. And the ones that did arrive and support, and I applaud them for their courage in that, because like they are going against something that is in their parties, in their own parties. So.
And why did you decided to have that conversation with them, with other people? I believe that you had a doctor with you, and it was not you alone. So
Yeah.
what was?
Well, when you're marching like this, when you're doing an activity like this, I don't wear earphones or allow myself to be distracted by a cell phone, unless it's a call, because you're marching in on the highway, into oncoming traffic, especially if there's only 2 lanes. You have to keep your head up and be aware of what's going on, but you have time to kind of ponder things, right? And I realize that I need to go to them with some kind of a solution based on the observations that I made. And what I was observing was a great deal of unhappy people. And like I said, I've met thousands of people up to this point. And I needed to go to them with some solution. And what I saw as the solution was what I called the 3 R's, 3 plus R equals R, or the 3R equation, whatever you want to call it, kind of, to label it or give it a selling point. But it was repeal mandates, reinstate employees, restitution for wages lost equals repair, because that's what I think needed to happen. There needed to be some kind of repair going on across the country with regards to how these policies have impacted people, and it's such a divisive issue. It's like nothing I had ever seen before in this country. And with that, the repeal piece, I needed to be able to say why I think they should be repealed. And because I don't necessarily think that I need to be a doctor to understand things about biology or science, but I needed to be able to have somebody with me who could explain it and reinforce the message. Because we know now, I think it's fairly well documented that most of the measures that were put into place did little to nothing to prevent
the transmission.
Yeah, and they were probably more likely harmful, because now we have so many frightened people, and there's probably no real need for it. And I saw that happening when we had mandatory masking. To me, it was it impedes communication, and it cuts ourselves off from each other. And early on, that was something that didn't sit well with me. So I needed to be able to have that voice who could speak with authority on that issue, because I didn't want it to come across as, it's just, what do I know? I'm just a soldier. But however, now I have, this kind of support within a credentialed epidemiologist, and who was able to kind of speak to why mandates should be repealed.
Why that was not a solution. So after that meeting, you went back to where you stopped, and were you happy with the?
I was, because like I said, I think it was what I needed. And what I wanted to show to the Canadian people was that this system can work, because those members of parliament who came to speak to me, they responded to their constituents. Their constituents said to them, "This is an important issue. Please talk to this gentleman. He's not, going there to just, be incoherent and speak nonsense. He has something to say." And their members of parliament are their representatives, and they listen to their constituency. And I think that is, in and of itself, something to look at as a positive. I didn't expect them to flick a switch and, make everything okay. I didn't expect that. I was able to go in there, speak to them, deliver my 3R equation, and furthermore, speak to them on how I see myself and us, actually, and others aligned in this kind of mentality to go to There's a number of Canadian citizens out there, and we feel there's a kind of an imbalance. And how do we bring balance to this situation? And we speak for all these Canadian citizens, and we think that we can now assist you by bringing these voices together, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was able to speak to that, and so I'm fairly happy with the meetings and how it was, even though it was, like I said, because in the traditional media, they have the power to portray reality in much different ways, and they chose to distort it. Personally, I think it was a successful meeting. Like I said, it's a demonstration that if you work at it and you're determined and you persevere, you can make things happen. And so after it was like, I don't really have time to pay much attention to what was being reported on it. I came away with it with a fairly good feeling. Went back to where we had left off on the 23rd of June. We resumed the march now with a bit more spotlight on us.
But before that, you worked more than 4,300.
Yeah, it's actually 44, closer to 4,400 kilometers now because of some of the back and forth that we had to do. And we hadn't really realized it, but there was a couple of sections that we had to pass through early on because of the weather and the road conditions, and we made up for that along the way.
But during that time, did you had some, downs? Asking yourself why I'm doing that, what is happening, and I must quit. I'm tired, or.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. It was probably about a month into it. There was definitely, for some, the physical toll that it was taking on us and me, and the stress and strain of everybody, living in this, you're not going home at night and putting your feet up and watching TV. You're doing this 10 or 11 hours a day.
And the responsibility also, all these people around.
Yeah, exactly. And there was one point, it was in Coaldale, Alberta, and I actually met him last night. So that was good to see him. This gentleman, his name is Brent Ginther. So that particular day, probably about 6 weeks into it, cold day in Alberta, tired, and having a kind of an issue with one of my feet, and just not getting the speed that I wanted, and just wondering what I had taken on, and I'm wondering if I just stopped everything, would anybody even notice, or No, I wouldn't say it was like a total crisis or anything, but definitely at that point, dark thoughts were weighing on us. And I just happened to, we passed through this town called Coaldale, Alberta, and we were on this kind of stretch of highway, and I see, and this happened a lot, right? Like folks would see, and they would either know who I was and what I was doing, or they wanted to find out, so they would pass us, pull over, and then get out of the vehicles and walk towards us. And I see this gentleman, and he's approaching. He's got this limp, and he gets closer and he introduces himself. And he was in the 1st Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and he was serving overseas in Afghanistan. He got injured by enemy machine gun fire, and he lost a lot of muscle tissue on one of his legs, so it left him with this kind of disability. And it was always good to see the vets come out and say hi during the march, and he came up and he said, this is really important what you're doing. And that was it. That was kind of all I needed to hear, like this, to get me back in the game, so to speak. And that was probably, one of the worst times. And honestly, there was days when, that happened periodically, but every once in a while, somebody would come up and they would say something that was along that line. This is important to me. This is important to my family. Thank you for what you're doing. And every time I had some of those dark days, coincidentally enough, somebody would come up and say something like that. And so that kind of encouragement too, that really kept me going.
That was helping. And so when you resume the march, we are you're in Ontario right now. You're near Ottawa, and there's more people now with you because of that meeting with the members of parliament. More publicity around that, and so you went back where you left to start again. And so at that time, you must say, okay, I'm going to do it. That must be a very great feeling, knowing that you'll achieve your goal. You're just there. You're just there. And you know that you have all these people because you're by the press and by a lot of Canadians that didn't know you. And so now you know that you have, you wanted to have more visibility, not for yourself, for the cause. And now you go back, and I believe that you've seen an evolution, and that must be a great feeling to.
The people that came to support me and march for a while or do whatever they wanted to do, they always had something positive to say, and thank you for what you're doing, and here's why. I'm a nurse. I lost my job. I talked to everybody, from pilots, stewardesses, D&D personnel, and they all been affected by this, and they all had come forward to say something to me. And then anybody with any negative, or there was zero interactions with anybody who said this must stop, and here's why. I didn't encounter not one person who was like, what you're doing is wrong, and make and offer me a coherent argument why I should not be doing this. Like, zero. There was the occasional one finger salute here and there, or somebody has something.
One finger salute.
somebody has something negative to say as they pass by in 100 kilometers an hour, which I didn't really. It didn't really resonate with me anyway, because I couldn't, I don't think they understand the Doppler effect. And then I encountered maybe one person who, I remember we were walking through Winnipeg, and I encountered one person who was like, all the mandates are gone, why are you doing this? And when I tried to offer my reasons, they didn't really want to talk about it. Do you know what I mean? So I had this feeling, like it was the same feeling that, like when I was still jumping out of airplanes, you get to this point where if you have to, it's hard to describe, but when you are in an airplane and you have your parachute on and you stand up and you hook your static line up to there's this wire, right? And you're coming close to the drop zone. Okay. And you're just about to get ready to go out the door, and you think about all the things that may happen. This is my reaction anyway. There's just this mix of emotions. Like, it's like, what if the parachute doesn't open? Or what if I collide with another parachutist on the way down? Or, I have a rough landing and I break my, you know what I mean? So it was just like, that was kind of the way I felt about it too. But at the same time, everything really turned out really well. To the point where you saw, like, I was prepared for some people to be here, and I have to say I was prepared for like a big crowd, but not what I saw there. It was absolutely incredible. It took my breath away, and
that was huge.
Yeah, and the way everybody, it was exactly what I wanted to see. It was exactly what I wanted to demonstrate with all the veterans who came out to help me with that, and they were instrumental in this. Is like, this is what we do. We march in formation. It's a way that you get a bunch of individuals from point A to point B. You do this in formation so that you don't lose anybody, and everybody's together, and they look around and they can see that we're all moving in the same direction, right? You're not leaving anybody behind, and it's easy to count people. It's organization, right? And everybody had a really positive experience about it. It wasn't, basic training or anything, but it's a way where you can demonstrate organization and leadership and how it can be applied. So,
but I can tell you, I was there the last day. I started that with you, and I did the 22K. But it was very well organized, and I feel secure. And everybody, you were listening what you have to do, because when you walk like that, in streets, and something can happen. And I saw that the security of the people marching with you was very important, and that was fun. You have time to speak and with other people, meet other people, and following you and knowing that we are doing in the right direction, physically and emotionally also. And so when you just arrived at the monument, what was you wanted to do something special, and you did it. Can you describe that to us?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had announced my intention to carry my flag that I got presented to me upon the completion of my time in the regular army. And I wanted to put it down by the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier because, like I said, what I saw happen to our veterans back in February was very disturbing to me. And, I was very unhappy with the way that, they were forcibly removed. And I felt that this was part of what we needed to do to restore dignity to that site. And take it back for not just the veterans, but like I said yesterday, it was everybody who was in that line of work who had to put themselves in harm's way, including members of the Canadian public who don't realize it. So I did it. I put my flag down on it, and like I said, I put my hand on that tomb, knowing that in that spirit of the Canadian soldier, and like everybody else who has sacrificed, that I could know in my heart of hearts that there was still that spirit was still alive. With the knowing that we had what it took to stand up and say something and do something for what's right.
And that was very emotional for everybody that were there at that time, who were there at that time. Sorry, and for you also. It's and you deliver a speech also after that, and well delivered, well taught. Did you think about that speech a long time ago, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was. I think it had been something I had been thinking about since the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Because and then I put something together a couple nights before, and it was easy to deliver. Well, I wouldn't say easy. I was able to deliver it because it had been, something on my mind for, 4.5 months. So I feel like I have a responsibility now to all of the folks who have said, or who I've met along the way and feel that, this is something they've said that, they have hope again and things like that. And I think I need to keep that alive somehow. And like I said in that talk I gave yesterday, I think, we have freedom here. Is it being siphoned away? Yes. Can we do something to stop that? I believe we can. And how we do that is something I need to dwell on a little bit. But I think really at the end of the day, it comes to us standing up against this tide of misinformation, right? And with our head up and with dignity. And it's like that march, you know what I mean? Like when you're leading a group of people like that, you have to, they have to know where you're going, and you have to lead them with discipline. And I'm not talking about the kind of discipline where, people are insulted. I'm talking about the kind of discipline that's necessary to keep people moving in the same direction
To achieve a goal.
Yeah.
And I'm very pleased that you give us this time. And for me, and I'm speaking for me, but also I believe for a lot of Canadians, that you give us hope, and you encourage us to stand up and speak out for what we believe. And if we want to change this country, I believe that, we must be out there and having a discussion. And that was very important, what you said also about peacefully. We don't like what is happening in our country right now, but there's a solution. And yes, protesting is something that we must do when we don't like something peacefully, but also acting. And you did that. You show us that it's time for action. So I appreciate that, and for that encouragement for us, for all Canadians. And I hope that we will win that battle that we are doing, a peaceful battle, I'm using that term, to change the public opinion and to have more people that will know that, this country can be improved a lot. And so, but you're an example for a lot of Canadians. And I want to thank you very much, James, and thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, everybody. And I believe that we'll be able maybe to show you James' speech that he delivered. It's a great speech and it will be available. We'll put a link also for you to be able to have that speech. Thank you very much. See you another time.